Good evening from Rocky Mountain PBS. I'm Cynthia Hessin. This is Colorado State of Mind. Tonight, we want to cover three things on our program. A bit later, Kevin Vaughan, senior reporter for iNews at Rocky Mountain PBS, has a new report on how well child obesity is being addressed in our public schools. And we're also going to talk with Dave Phillips, reporter for the Gazette in Colorado Springs, on a new series he completed in May called Other Than Honorable. It's about the number of veterans who are being discharged from the services, sometimes because of their war-related injuries. And Phillips finds too many injured vets aren't getting the care they should from the U.S. military. Before we get to that, however, let's take advantage of the fact that Dave has also covered the Black Forest wildfire in the past week or 10 days. And here we are recording on Thursday morning. Give us the picture of how it is right now.
Fortunately, we're in the mop-up phase. The fire's almost contained. People are starting to be let back into what's left of their homes. But I was able to go in with a family yesterday, and there's nothing to go back to. I mean, nothing. These houses, I saw whole blocks burned down just to ashes. Windows melted, cars, just metal skeletons. People were shuffling around trying to pick what they could out of their houses, but there's nothing left.
500 some houses, 502, and 2 people killed. That was because they just waited too long and didn't get out?
Our understanding from what we've learned at the Gazette is that these were people who were on their way, packing their cars, literally in their garage, getting ready to get out. But this was a firestorm. It came in fast, it came in hot, and they live in an area surrounded by trees.
Oh, my goodness. And is this the same area, or this area will have the same problems as the Waldo Canyon people because of the flooding that could now happen, right?
Well, it's not as big of a threat because this area, while it's high, this is right on the Palmer Divide that divides Douglas County from El Paso County. While it's high, it's not as steep. It's going to take a long time to grow back. I mean, most of Black Forest is gone, nuked. But in terms of flooding and landslides, that's hopefully will not be a problem.
Well, it still could not be a more remarkable time for southern Colorado. Once again, just, as a year ago, we were going through all of this. And last night, as a matter of fact, the Colorado broadcasting community got together to promote a phone bank fundraiser for the Red Cross of Colorado, a chance for citizens anywhere to lend some support to this large, ongoing tragedy of lost homes, hundreds of evacuees, overworked firefighting crews. As you know, as we've said here, the Black Forest fire was the first one to get very large last week, but there are others. And it happened that last week we had El Paso County Commissioner Sally Clark here in the studio around that same time. She mused about becoming an expert in everything involved with wildfires in this past year.
The Waldo Canyon fire was in my commissioner district last year, so those were all my constituents that were impacted by Waldo Canyon, and certainly the horrendous loss of homes that we saw in Mountain Shadows. We never thought on Tuesday afternoon, when I was sitting in a Board of County Commissioners meeting, that when we heard there was a fire in Black Forest, that this would amount to what we're being told today, 360 plus homes. We don't know what the eventual impact will be, but this has just taken off. I mean, we've been fighting to get flooding dollars with regard to post-Waldo at the national level, and have been successful in getting emergency watershed protection, and we've been trying to prepare folks in those areas of the burn area that are going to be impacted by floods when it rains. Then all of a sudden this other fire breaks out, and it's heartbreaking. But I guess the good thing about the way we're set up is the practice doesn't necessarily make perfect, but it certainly has helped us to understand what the lessons learned were with Waldo. Mm-hmm. We went ahead and put our disaster declaration in immediately. The state came forward and offered assistance. We have a disaster assistance center opening today with nonprofits, from mental health counselors to Goodwill, Care and Share. All of the agencies, insurance companies are coming in to help those who have found out today that they've lost their homes and need to get things moving along so that they have a place to live and the support system and food for their families. So it's I guess the one thing I would say as a county commissioner, our role is to really basically provide morale boosting for our community, to communicate with our individuals, to let them know what's going on. And the counties really are the safety nets. We pick up the pieces when everyone has left town and the firefighters are done. The county's going to be left with the social services and the human services aspect of it, the health department and air quality, things that we're going to have to deal with after the fact of the cleanup and the process of helping people rebuild their lives.
You have an interesting job, Sally Clark.
I do.
Thank you.
Thanks. Well, it's going to be another tough fire season in Colorado. Just as we were having our fire, we were looking to our neighbors to the south, which my district neighbors Fremont County, and they were dealing with the Royal Gorge fire, and then we knew there was one in Huerfano and Rocky Mountain National Park, and last year it was High Park fire, and Boulder's had the 4 Mile Canyon, and I not necessarily do I want to be an expert on fire in Colorado, but somehow that's the job that I've been dealt, and we just do the best that we can with what we have. But truly, I think our community always steps up. I mean, Care and Share has seen an influx of food that they didn't have, and donations, and when things get rough, people step up.
That was Commissioner Sally Clark speaking last week. The last time that we had Dave Phillips on this program was about a year ago. He had written a book called
Lethal Warriors.
Lethal Warriors. And we bring it up because the program has been nominated for a regional Emmy, and we will find out in July whether it won that program or won that award. But meanwhile, Dave, let's segue now to your new series on veterans. Dave grew up in Colorado Springs and has covered Fort Carson and everything for a long time. Other than Honorable was published in May 19th. What is it?
Basically, we looked at how the number of soldiers getting kicked out of the Army for breaking the rules has gone up and up and up every year like a steep stairway. And we thought, is this because more of these guys are deploying more often? Maybe they have more of the invisible injuries like a traumatic brain injury or PTSD that could cause them to have trouble following the rules. And the Army then, rather than helping them with these injuries, just kicks them out. And so we decided to look at some of these guys, and in fact, that's exactly what we found. Injured combat veterans, people that were of no use really to the Army anymore, yet instead of the Army putting them out through the medical process, it was faster and easier for them to put them out through the disciplinary process.
I think this is just astounding. It's certainly not what taxpayers have in mind, or anyone who says let's support the troops has in mind.
Well, and especially since the troubling thing is that when these guys get put out for misconduct, a lot of times they get what's called an other than honorable discharge. And that essentially bars them from accessing VA benefits for the rest of their lives. So a lot of times the guys who need the help the most can't get it.
Well, that is really upside down. Let's introduce a couple of the people that you have profiled. Gerald Jensen.
Gerald Jensen is a man who was driving a Humvee in Baghdad in 2007, and a bomb essentially went right through his face. He was medevaced out of the country. He was in a coma for months, and when he woke up, he essentially told the Army that he wanted to go back to active duty. So over the next 18 months, the Army rebuilt his face. He healed miraculously. And he went back to another tour in Afghanistan where he was injured again. So this guy has an amazing heroic story. He did more than anyone could possibly ask. And then when Gerald Jensen got back to the United States, he was put in the medical retirement process for wounded soldiers. During that process, he tested positive for amphetamine. And the Army said, "You're getting kicked out for drug use." He said, "Look, wait a minute. I'm on all sorts of prescription pain medicines. I've never been in trouble for any drug use before. Will you retest this to make sure this isn't a false positive?" And the Army said, this is a quote, his commander said, "That's not our job." So here's this guy who had done above and beyond, and the people that were in charge of him afterwards couldn't be bothered to do anything.
Oh my goodness. Let's just hear a short soundbite from this soldier who has had so much trouble.
If you were walking down the stairs with your briefcase in your hand and your stack of papers in your hand, and you tripped on a corner of the road in your office building and fell down the stairs, would you expect the people that you work for to pay for your medical bills and take care of you if you weren't able to come back to work? Why shouldn't we? The reason why it's a bigger deal with us is because usually somebody doesn't jump out of a corner in the stairwell and shoot you with an AK-47 when you're at work. They expect us to fulfill our contract that we signed when we enlisted. They expect us to follow our orders. They expect us to do what we're told. They expect us to die if that's what happens. So in that contract, they agree to take care of us when we agree to serve. They're not taking care of us.
I was at the top of my game. You know, I gave everything, and then as soon as my PTSD started getting really bad, they just gave up on me. It's quicker and it's easier just to kick guys out, and then, you know, and then have the jails get filled up with them. You know, I've done 3 deployments for this country, and this is the thanks I get. I get assaulted by guards. I don't get to even talk to my children. You know, I'm not saying what happened was right, but I don't know what happened, and I'm trying to get in a treatment program to make sure that never ever happens again. And the Army is denying me the ability to go to a treatment program.
And from the helicopter to Kandahar, I don't remember anything. And waking up at the hospital there, in a seat collar next to another soldier. And as soon as I woke up, he looked at me and said, he goes, "I'm glad to see you awake." And he told me, he goes, "Do you know what happened?" And I said, "I don't remember." And he goes, "Do you remember anything from before the blast?" And I said, "No, I can't. He goes, "Well, just to let you know, we lost 2 people." And one of them was a good friend of mine. It's crazy because he just got married before he left. And just from that point, it wasn't the same.
Let's also meet Kash Alvaro, who has come today with Dave Phillips, another veteran who has been through a great deal. Tell us when you joined the service and where. How did you get to Colorado?
I joined in July 2008. I did basic training in Fort Leonard Wood, and after basic training, I was stationed here at Fort Carson.
And what happened then, Dave?
Kash got blown up in Afghanistan. I mean, like thousands of people. And he came home seemingly in one piece, but with a traumatic brain injury and PTSD. I mean, that's the story, right?
Yes.
Except some people in the Army thought he was injured, and some people thought he was faking it.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, it's like an invisible injury. To you and I, it wouldn't look like there was anything wrong with me. I walk around and talk and do the same thing everybody else does, but when it's inside that's hurting. You know, I suffer from seizures that nobody on the outside sees. It's just something I go through.
Are you on medication that the Army is paying for now?
No, actually, it's through help of people outside of the military and doctors outside of the military that step forward and, you know, read the story and are willing to help me, that have got me medication.
You hardly think that we have to have a bake sale to take care of our wounded veterans.
Well, you know, if the Army had done what they should have with a guy who was having regular seizures from a brain injury, we wouldn't. The VA would take care of him. But what they did instead is they decided that Kash was faking his injuries, and therefore they wrote him up for all sorts of small infractions. Being late, not showing up to doctor's appointments when he was hospitalized, things like that. And they court-martialed him, threw him in jail, and basically made him sign a piece of paper that said, quit the Army and we'll drop these charges. Of course, when he signed that paper, it also took away all his benefits.
That is absolutely insidious. And I don't suppose that's any one person's fault. Or do you think?
Yes and no. There is a system that creates an incentive for this to happen. If you were Kash's commander and you wanted to medically retire him, it's going to take you at least 14 months because the medical retirement system is clogged and dysfunctional. So if you have to go back to Afghanistan in 6 months, which they did,
Yep.
you can't get a replacement until he's gone.
Right.
And so it encourages you to do the wrong thing.
Oh, my goodness. Well, this is a fantastic series that Dave has done. Don't you think it's going to win a Pulitzer Prize?
Don't jinx me.
All right, sorry.
If
I
we
won't
can
do
help
it.
some of these guys, that'll be
That's
the real thing to do. The good news and the encouraging thing is that Representative Mike Kaufman read the series, and he's created a congressional commission to look into what's going on and what can we fix to keep this from happening again.
Well, an incredible story. You can see the whole thing at gazette.com/soldiers. And we thank Dave Phillips, reporter for the Colorado Gazette, for the Gazette in Colorado Springs. And big thanks to veteran Kash Alvaro, and much good luck to you. I hope that the people who are helping you continue to do that. Now let's turn to our new iNews at Rocky Mountain PBS report tonight on childhood obesity and its consequences for individuals and for public health. Senior reporter Kevin Vaughan brings us the story tonight about a state law meant to help that really isn't doing very much.
In 2011, the Colorado legislature passed a new law requiring the state's elementary schools to provide students with the opportunity for 30 minutes of physical activity a day. It was seen as a piece of the battle against childhood obesity. One of the backers of the measure was the Colorado Children's Campaign.
We looked at legislation and we saw that Colorado was one of a very small number of states that didn't have any requirements on the books relating to physical activity.
Experts across the country agree that one key to stemming the growing obesity problem among children is to get them moving.
So with regard to physical activity, the recommendations come through that we're looking for at least 60 minutes of physical activity every day, and that's moderate to vigorous movement. So with kids, we'll see academic performance improves quite considerably. When kids get an opportunity to get their bodies moving, we see attention improve, cognition overall, they just fire better in their head.
During the legislative process, the reporting requirements were stripped from the measure after several school districts and groups representing administrators objected on the basis of local control and budgetary constraints. As a result, the final bill required only that each district have a policy calling for the opportunity for an average of 30 minutes a day of physical activity in elementary schools, and it allowed recess to count toward that requirement. Because districts across the state already met that standard, the practical application of the law was simple. It did not change anything in the day-to-day lives of Colorado's elementary school students. Still, backers believe it was a positive step because it instituted a standard for physical activity and because it prohibited districts whose students were getting more than 30 minutes a day from cutting back.
We were satisfied with it. We felt like it was a step in the right direction, and we know that obesity policy is complex and it's bigger than what happens at the state capitol. So we also need to see strong access to healthy foods, safe walkways for our kids, and it's bigger than just one single piece of policy. So it felt like a great step in the right direction.
And here to tell us more about kids, exercise, and childhood obesity, senior iNews reporter Kevin Vaughan. And Kevin, I noticed in your story online, you talked with an epidemiologist at the Centers for Disease Control, Janet Fulton. She called the epidemic of childhood obesity a double-edged sword.
Yes, I mean, the childhood obesity epidemic in this country is well known, it's been well documented, and there's a lot of concern about the health risks of kids being heavier, but she was pointing out that there are emotional and cultural issues for kids who are bigger too. Sometimes feeling left out of other activities, feeling like they don't fit in with other kids. and that sort of thing. And so that's the point she was trying to make, is that this is about more than just the physical health of their bodies.
Yes. And the physical health is enough to grapple with, because those kids could be on track to be adult diabetes patients, and that's ballooning too.
Yes, absolutely. All the research shows that kids who are obese have a much greater chance of being obese adults and of having all of those health issues that can go along with obesity. Diabetes, like you mentioned, sleep apnea, cardiovascular disease, the list goes on and on. And you know, the data has been on a trend line for a long time. I mean, since the early 1980s, then the percentage of U.S. kids who are obese has basically tripled.
Oh my goodness. So it really is, it's the macro problem, but also the micro for individual kids. So in trying to combat what really is an epidemic, the state passed this law, but it doesn't sound like it has, well, as you explained in your piece, it hasn't done a lot.
Well, it essentially memorialized the status quo, I think, because it instituted a law that said elementary school kids in the state have to get 30 minutes of physical activity a day. And it allowed things like recess to count toward that. And the standard was so low, the 30 minutes a day standard was so low, that almost all schools that we could find were meeting it before the law was put in place. So
who did the homework on the law, if I may ask?
Well, you know, the law that was passed was not the law that was introduced. The law that was originally introduced had a rigorous reporting requirement where schools would have been required to lay out publicly their plan for physical activity, the credentials of the person that was in charge of that program, and actually it was envisioned as becoming part of like the school accountability report, that along with your test scores, you would say to people, this is what we're doing to keep kids moving. During the legislative process, fears about budget pressures and about local control and about all the things that schools are required to cram into a school day led to the legislation being gutted, basically. I mean, in defense of those who supported the law that passed, the one thing that it did do was it said that schools could not cut back. If they were doing more than the 30 minutes now, they were not allowed to cut back to 30 minutes.
All right, well, that's fairly good.
But it also just, for Colorado school kids, it meant basically no changes in their day-to-day movement at school. And you can debate for a long time about whose job it is to make sure kids are active and healthy. And it's certainly true that schools today are doing things that when I was a kid, schools weren't expected to do. Nobody ate breakfast at school when I was a kid,
course, yes.
And yet now we have programs that provide breakfast at schools in a lot of places because of concerns about the inability of some families to provide that for various reasons,
and
economic.
Being important to the brain.
Exactly, and when you think about how much time kids spend at school, I mean, it's almost like a 40-hour work week for them.
It's kind of where everything happens for them.
Absolutely.
Speaking of when we were kids, there was at that time a president's physical fitness guideline. Is that what it was? We don't have that anymore.
That is what it was. I think it was called the President's Physical Fitness Challenge. I personally failed every year because I couldn't do the pull-ups in the allotted time.
Really?
Or even any. Very few kids could, I'm told. But that went away over time, but it is coming back, actually, and it's been reinstituted, and I think the hope is that over the next few years it's going to be reintegrated into schools across the country. And I've been told that it will have more realistic goals for kids than perhaps what we had as kids, which involved, I think, sit-ups and push-ups and pull-ups and a mile run or something.
All fine goals, I would say. Thank you, Kevin Vaughan, for this week's story on exercise and childhood obesity from iNews at Rocky Mountain PBS. You can read more about it on our rmpbs.org webpage under the News tab. That's Colorado State of Mind for this weekend. You may see it again or any of our programs at video.rmpbs.org. Next week, iNews is back with some very interesting facts about tornado season here in Colorado. Hope you can join us then. I'm Cynthia Hessin. Good night.